Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer, and welcome to my channel. I'm now back from holiday, and so now I get to tell you more about things I've actually been reading, as opposed to the videos that I've had that I sort of rushed to sort of like schedule and get sorted before I went on holiday. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the books that I've been reading recently. I'm going to talk about some of the books I read on holiday, so this will seem like more than a week because this is about 2.5 weeks worth of reading. I'm going to leave out the Booker ones just because, I mean, otherwise we'd be here all day, and also I'm doing separate videos on those. But for now, here are some of the books that I read over the last couple of weeks. And so you will notice some themes as I go through this of some of the types of books I was reading while on holiday. So apart from some of the Booker ones, I was reading quite a few nature books and sort of non-fiction books, particularly those for the Wainwright Prize, because of course there has to be some other prize involved here. So I'll kind of talk about those fairly quickly, but the first of these was Time on Rock by Anna Fleming, which is a story of Anna herself, finding herself and finding her place in the world whilst basically rock climbing. And this is sort of, we're not talking like indoor rock climbing with sort of, you know, conveniently placed handles or whatever. We're talking on kind of rock faces out in the wilderness. And she really guides us through quite a large number of different types of terrain, and particularly the kind of almost communion with nature that she feels when she does that, right? So she's sort of climbing up and is sort of in the middle of these really quite intense and sort of, you know, scary, terrifying, dangerous climbs. And at the same time, she sort of learns quite a lot about herself and sort of also just really gets to see nature up close. She gets to see these little areas where animals or insects or birds hide out or whatever. And so there's a real reverence for nature throughout this book that I found really just quite beautiful and quite interesting. A couple of others from that same prize list. I also read Shadowlands by Matthew Green, which I really loved. And this is a book that really looks at forgotten areas in the sort of British landscape. So particularly where somewhere's almost gone missing, right? So a town has been built over the ruins of a previous town, or in one case, a village was sort of, you know, sort of slowly had to be abandoned as kind of cliff erosion meant that you know, the land basically disappeared. We also have a reference to a Welsh valley that was intentionally flooded to sort of provide a waterway to Liverpool, and we get this really harrowing and interesting story of the people who lived in that town, this village, who all had to leave everything that had been there. It was, you know, a Welsh-speaking village that was sort of had a real sort of history of Welsh-speaking kind of culture and stories and fairy tales and everything, and had to sort of be just abandoned. And there was this sort of moment where the village, you know, the people who lived in that village had to watch as their town was intentionally flooded. So this book is really interesting at sort of navigating these different places. And I have no idea how Matthew Green went about researching this or thinking about this, but I just found it a really interesting and really powerful book. I just think it's so interesting and really clever. And finally, on the nature front of things, at least for now, wait for the next few weeks, is Goshawk Summer by James Aldred. And I thought this was really interesting. He is a wildlife photographer, and he is particularly spending a lot of time in this book trying to take pictures of goshawks, as you may guess by the title, but also the book becomes this much more interesting discussion of the way that nature changes, and particularly as the pandemic hits during the kind of course of parts of this book. So he starts to see what happens when nature is allowed to take back over certain areas, you know, where people aren't passing through all the time. But then also what happens when nature gets used to that and then everybody comes out of lockdown and starts going through these places again. And I just thought it was a really, on paper, it doesn't sound like this book should really kind of be quite as profound as I think it is. It's sort of, you know, it's interesting, and, you know, he's talking a lot about finding this sort of particular bird and really admiring it. But there's something so beautiful in his just sheer admiration for this type of bird, and this the kind of the way we don't fully understand its mysteries. There are various activities it does, such as sort of picking up twigs, and then the female goshawks will pick up twigs and just throw them at the men at some point, and it doesn't seem to serve any other purpose. That the twigs are not good for the nest. They're not anything else. It's literally seemingly as a sort of, it's my turn now, come and let me kind of look after the chicks now. So yeah, just this really interesting and sort of bizarre book that I really just took to and found a lot to love in. I just thought it was really beautifully done, and just such a strong but also tender view of nature as well, which I really appreciated. I also read some non-fiction that was a bit more on the political side. So I read Lost in Work by Amelia Horgan. And this is a book that basically looks at kind of the current structures around particularly sort of our nature and our relationship with work, with capitalism, with various other things, and sort of unpicks it, particularly in terms of what does this look like in future? What does future work look like in a way that's sustainable and healthy for people, in a way that's that gives dignity? I just thought it was a really interesting and powerful book, and also it at one point involves a reference to Britney Spears, which is always welcome. Talking about wanting a Bugatti and a Maserati. So I mean, but I just thought this was a really clever book. It's very short, but gets really to the point in terms of understanding what does not work with the nature of work at the moment. And it was interesting reading this on the first day of a holiday and just being like, yeah, fight the system. But yeah, also just a really, really good book. I also read My Fourth Time We Drowned by Sally Hayden. And this recently won the Orwell Prize for political writing. So whereas small things like this read the fiction, won the fiction prize, this was the non-fiction winner. And this is all about migration, and particularly migration to Europe from other parts of the world. And this book is really quite heartbreaking in so many ways, not only because obviously telling the tale of migration and why people are leaving is inherently sort of sad in itself, just that people feel that they've kind of got no other option, but also just because we learn a lot in this book about the cruelty of some of the policies and laws around this. So actually there are people who are really seeking help. They've done all the kind of quote unquote right things according to the policies that are out there, and yet they're still left in detention centres that are completely inhumane, where there isn't enough water, where there isn't enough food, where they're all sort of huddled together, and it really, this book, I think that what's so powerful about it is just the way it talks about the trauma that is associated with it, the human cost, not only in terms of lives lost, but what that does to a person to go through a really dehumanizing experience like that. I just think this is an absolute stunner of a book. I just think this is brilliantly done. A really vital piece of work, and I'd caution as well, it's a hard read for all the reasons I've just said, particularly the audio, as I found, because in the audio she also uses audio clips from people who were in contact with her about migration. So I'm guessing in the physical book those that have just been referenced, but in the audio book you do hear, for example, people crying out saying help us, and then hear a bombshell in the background. It is heartbreaking. It is a hard read. I also think this is a really vital and stunning piece of work. I really commend Sally Hayden for pulling this together and for writing this with both so much anger and also so much heart at the same time. I just think it's a sublimely done book about something incredibly vital and important. And then a couple of lighter reads, you'll be delighted to hear, a couple of advanced copies of books. So I read Getting Lost by Annie Ernaux, and earlier this year I started reading a few Annie Ernaux books, and just absolutely fell in love with the way she writes. She has this real heart, but sort of writes quite candidly about her own life, and also about politics and the world around her, and sort of French society as she goes. And this book, sort of recently translated by Alison, is just so interesting. It kind of follows on from a previous one of her books, and describes a love affair between her and this man who clearly does not care for her quite as much as she cares for him, and her love for him borders on almost obsession, where she spends the whole day kind of just waiting for him to call and to kind of connect in with her, and she recognizes this. There's something so brilliant about the book because it's sort of told as a diary almost, but there's a sort of insert of the author coming back and saying, well, actually, or I don't think I realized this at that time, but this is probably what was happening, or something like, things along those lines. And I just think this is so great, and I just sort of reinforces just why I love Annie Ernaux's writing. I think it's really clever and really honest in a way that we don't often get in sort of non-fiction about personal relationships. It takes a lot of vulnerability to rewrite this way, and I really commend how she's able to do this here. And last but definitely not least, The Locked Away Life by Drew Davies, which I just really enjoyed as a pleasurable read, because as it's maybe become, I'm quite good at picking out books that I like and finding books that I'm going to enjoy, but I do often end up loading myself with lots of books that are either quite dense or quite hard going, and that can be difficult on holiday because you're like, oh great, I'm just I'm not even really relaxing, I'm just sort of reading about some quite dark or quite heavy things, but actually The Locked Away Life, although it does cover some quite dark territory, I think was just a really fun, engaging read. It tells the story of a young man, Bruno, who sort of essentially works out that he's gay, and sort of has a sort of slow kind of coming to terms with his identity. There's also, he feels like an other in many ways as well, because a lot of his family are from the traveller community as well. And he meets this older woman whose name has just completely slipped my mind as I'm talking. This older woman who seems to have this sort of murky past and is not really revealed too much about what it is. And it basically is just this really beautiful friendship and relationship between these two characters, absolutely just trying to find who they are, but also sort of really address some of the demons in their past. It involves, for example, Bruno, in terms of working out his sexuality, going to a sort of conversion therapy style camp, which is obviously terrifying. But I think this book handles that really well. It kind of allows that to be a serious topic, but also focuses really on the characters at the heart of it. So it was just a really pleasurable read, and it was just really enjoyable. I read it really quickly in sort of just a few hours while I was on a long bus journey while traveling, and it was just a delight, an absolute delight to read. So yeah, please do check that out as well. And I think, if I'm not wrong, apart from all the booker ones, those were the books I've been reading over the last couple of weeks, and they've been really fun to read and to check out. I hope you enjoy them if you check them out as well. I'm going to be continuing with booker videos for a bit, so apologies. Almost there. And at the time of filming this, I'm about 1.25 books away from finishing the long list, so the reviews will keep coming as well, and I'll be peppering in sort of my weekly reads around them as well. I've been Bob. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.